Hello everyone, good morning. My name is Yulia and I'm a senior project manager at Allcorrect company. And today I'm going to share the results of our research with you. And the answer we're trying to answer is, what is a good localization? But before we start, let's get acquainted. Okay, who is from game development? Put your hands up. Okay, and who is from game publishing? Okay, and who is the localization service provider? Oh, okay. Although the title of my presentation is about localization, we will talk not only about aspects of translation and adaptation, but also about the impact of a good or a bad localization can have on your wallet. Just a few words about our company. Allcorrect has just turned 11, and we're happy to say that during this period we've localized about 390 titles, and generally we're ready to help with all languages that can be profitable for you. And here is the overview of my session today, and I will come back to this slide after I cover each part of my presentation. So let's talk about research background. Why did we conduct this project? The first reason is to try to better understand what players value most. Sometimes we're all absorbed in our processes of localization and development that we forget about the preferences of players, the people who actually buy localized games. So wouldn't it be a good idea to ask them what localization quality means from their perspective, not from our own perspective? Moreover, this research can help us identify bottlenecks in localization process. Moreover, it's not a secret that localizers have a tarnished reputation in the gaming community, and we want to change this. We want to show that we really care of the final result, that we're not paper pushers. We really want to help. Okay, why did we choose these two markets for our research? Well, Russia is big, and according to News Portal, it's the 11th most lucrative market in the world at the moment. And despite the fact there are stigmas attached to Russian market, we actually pay for localized games too. So if you're not translating into Russian, you're losing money. China, I think there is no need to explain anything because China is the most progressive market in the world at the moment. About research timeline. This project was started 2 years ago. In the very beginning, it was just a small survey with 2,000 Russian players. Then we slightly updated this survey, and launched it for Russian and for Chinese markets. And today we're presenting the results for you. But after it was presented at Game QA and Localization Forum, people got interested into our project, and we've decided to create kind of working group with such major developers as Ubisoft, Electronic Arts, and now today we share with them news about our project regularly. Okay, let's talk about overview of survey respondents. On this slide, you can see the total number of responses we've got from Chinese players and from Russian players. In terms of age distribution, the dominant group for Chinese market is 18-25. For Russian is under 18. And you can see that majority of players are men. Okay, and now it's the most interesting part of the presentation, summary of responses. And the first question was, why do you think people play games in general? Personally, I used to play just for fun, but it turned out that only 20% of respondents share my tastes. The majority of players want to be fully immersed, want to try various roles on, and want to enjoy the atmosphere of the game. But needless to say that full immersion cannot be achieved without a high-quality localization. So if you've decided to invest in localization, you should do it right, or you're leaving money. Okay, one of our hypotheses is the better your English is, the most likely you will play original version of the game, English version of the game. It's supported mostly by the fact that Americans play English versions all the time. But it turned out that about 30% of Chinese and 10% of Russian players know English well. And it's worth saying that this is from their perspective. And this is reality. According to EF Portal, the largest ranking of countries by English skills, both countries have low level of English fluency. So games should be definitely localized for these two markets. So that is a question, to localize or not to localize. Actually, this chart follows the previous ones almost exactly, because percentage of people who prefer the fully localized games corresponds to the percentage of people who don't know English well. Okay, how do you think? Do our players read all the texts? It turned out that 90% of Russian players read most of the text. Yeah, we're also a reader nation after all. But the situation is dramatically different for Chinese market, because only 40% of Chinese read most of the text. But we remember that they need to learn new things. They want to try various roles on. So the playing process is more important for them. Let's talk about cultural adaptation. But what do we mean by this? Cultural adaptation is a deeper level of localization that includes redrawing of different graphical elements, for example, banners, avatars, and also taking into account the unique aspect of the culture of the target market. But is it so necessary for players to feel fully like at home in the world of the game? The majority state that no. They want to see only unique aspects of the game in the target market. So let's talk about error types. Which error types are most crucial for players, and which of them are less of an issue? It was interesting to see the differences between answers of the players from two different markets. But we were also surprised to see that kind of mistakes that bug localization companies don't really bother players that much. Okay, the most crucial mistakes for Russian respondents are untranslated text, inaccuracies, fonts which were poorly chosen or illegible, and style issue, which, by the way, it's hard to measure, but still it is an issue. But it's not so bad from their perspective if they see spelling, grammar, punctuation mistakes, as well as different translation for one term per whole game. And finally, Russians are totally okay with profanity. And moreover, according to some open-ended questions of our survey, they get pretty annoyed if localized version of the game does not contain the profanity which was presented in the original version of the game. The most crucial issues for Chinese players pretty similar to Russian answers, but not exactly the same. For example, Chinese players are disappointed to face non-standard abbreviations and lack of censorship, because profanity is prohibited in China. And they're also okay with spelling, grammar, punctuation mistakes, and glossary errors. But it's worth saying that they will fed up more quickly than Russian players, and they stop playing the game or switch to original version much sooner than Russian players. Okay, this slide is especially for developers, because we asked our respondents what can prevent them from providing feedback about localization errors. It turned out that only 70% of Chinese players and 27% of Russian players actually provide feedback to developers about localization issues. But the rest don't know how to do that, or just not motivated to do that. And I think it is a good question to consider, because if there were a more transparent system of reporting bugs, or some rewarding system in the game for players who manage to find valid errors, we could catch localization mistakes much earlier than they became memes on the internet. And let's talk about another aspect of a good localization, about voiceover. So, first of all, we asked our players which version of VoiceOver do they prefer, and the results weren't pretty surprised for us about the Chinese market, because we know that Russian prefer localized version of VoiceOver, but the same cannot be said for Chinese players, for Chinese market, because the majority of respondents prefer original version of VoiceOver. Well, I think it can be due to lack of the good examples of a good, high-quality voiceover in Chinese market, but this question requires further research. And now let's talk about issues of voiceover. Russian respondents don't really like when speech is unnatural, when the casting was poor, when subtitles don't match voiceover. Everything, in general, they object to anything that can pull them out of the game experience. So not being able to switch between original and translated version is also an issue. Let's take a look at Chinese answers. Situation is pretty the same, but Chinese players have a really negative attitude toward overly familiar voices in voiceover. Okay, and what do you think? Is it possible to measure the impact of a bad localization? We think yes. It's not about negative comments in the internet, and we can prove this. It turned out that 7% of Chinese players and 13% of Russian players will stop playing the game of this developer. Just think of this for a second. They will stop playing not just this specific game, but all of your games. It's pretty scary. And majority of players will take action. So they will share their impressions with friends, will leave comments on different forums, and so on. On the other hand, a good localization have the same impact. So users will also share their impressions with their friends if a game was good localized. Okay, and yeah, one more good news, that players really ready to pay for a good localization. You can say that there is not so much difference between yes and no answers, but I think it's still because we all have bills to pay, so players really need to know how much more they should pay for this game. And if your game was badly localized and you fix all the issues and released this once again, players will still buy this game, even if it is not the latest game of your series. Let's talk about people who actually do localization, about translators. As a rule, developers name only localization service providers in the titles, in the credits. But how fair is this? The majority of respondents think it's not fair, and they prefer to see names of translators in the credits too. Now it's time to check hypotheses we tested, and I'd like to add some interactivity into this part of my presentation. So I will share with you the hypothesis, and you will let me know whether it's true or false from your perspective, okay? Okay, the first hypothesis we tested was that players who play less are more tolerant of errors. We assumed that hardcore players who want to be fully immersed can be really annoyed to see any errors in the game because it can yank them out of the game experience. Well, what do you think? Is it true or false? Who thinks it's true? Put your hands up. Okay, and who thinks it's false? Yeah, you're right. The majority is correct. It's false. All players are equally annoyed. So if you're a developer of a casual game and you think that there isn't so much text to translate, and I can do it myself, or I can ask a buddy from China or Russia to do it, just remember about this hypothesis and go to the pros. Okay, the following hypothesis was that younger people are more tolerant of errors. We assumed that kids or teenagers really often make mistakes in their writings, so it can be okay for them to see the same errors in the game. What do you think? False or true? False. True. Okay, it's false actually. So there is no room for mistakes even if the main audience of your game is kids and teenagers. Yeah, we've talked about this hypothesis a bit earlier, that players with better English prefer the original version. I don't have pretty much comments here. What do you think? Is it true or false? Who thinks it's true? And who thinks it's false? It's true. Actually. Yeah. Females are more sensitive to gender-neutral addressing. Okay. Who thinks it's true? Who thinks it's false? Yeah, you're right. It's false. So it's a good practice to think of the grammatical tokens and of the tags in the very beginning of developing process. And the latest hypothesis we tested was that RPG players are less sensitive to abbreviations. Who think that's false? True. It's false. Yeah, and how can we get abbreviations in general? It happens due to lack of the space in the in-game elements. So again, it's better to think of the string limitations in the very beginning of the process. And let's sum up everything that we have discussed today. First, keep in mind that a good and a bad localization can be quantified. So, users need localized games because they want to be fully immersed. Yeah, it's not necessary to redraw every single graphical element of the game, but still you should be ready to think of the tricky issues of the market. For example, no need to sell hamburger simulation in India and you will be okay. So do additional research and partner with your localization provider in advance. Okay, despite the fact that spelling, grammar, punctuation mistakes are not the most crucial mistakes for players, but still, respondents who stop playing the games due to these errors, percentage is pretty a lot. So we should avoid these mistakes too. And finally, voiceover is the most tricky aspect of localization because of the matter of taste, but still it was putting the efforts in because voiceover plays a major role of the user experience. So it's just a short plan. What should we do to improve our cooperation between developers and localizers? Please help us with technical requirement document. It's kind of style guide which usually can be sent for developers We really need to know about the rating of the game. We really need to know about addressing, formal or informal, about strength limitations, about all these questions to avoid the most common mistakes of localization in the future. Yeah, give us more time. Not because we are lazy, just because we need more time to work with your game correctly, to do additional research of the mechanic and different issues. And give us as much context as possible. Build, screenshot, videos, everything that you have will be useful for us. Answer on your localization partner's question, and I'd like to add here, sooner is better. And for developers especially, do think of some engineering in the beginning of the developing process. Think of the limits about language switching, about text resizing, and so on. And we will be on the safe side. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for your attention. If you have any questions, you can ask me here, or we have a stand right in this hall. And moreover, if you have any, ideas, comments about our research, please also let me know. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.